Hi. I recently finished the Half-Life series, so I could watch a Let's Play of Half-Life Alyx, and I really wanted to talk about it. I wrote a lot of notes for this video, so I'm going to be looking at my computer screen a lot, just so you know. So my history with the Half-Life series is that I played the first game in 2015, I played Half-Life 2 in 2018, and then I played Episode 1 and Episode 2 very recently in the space of only 2 weeks, which is, even for games as short as those are, pretty surprising that I finished them so quick for me. I haven't played the quote unquote spin off games, Blue Shift, Opposing Force, Lost Coast, kind of less of a spin off, but I do plan to play at least Lost Coast soon. The others probably will at some point too, because I generally like the series a whole lot, I would say. It's hard not to like it. I'm really not an expert in shooters. I like them. I've played several of them. But definitely from the ones I've played, there are not any that really replicate the freedom and kind of the way you move and the speed and almost most importantly, the gameplay variety that Half Life has. Maybe something like Dishonored does that, things that are more like first person RPGs, but um, I won't say the Elder Scrolls does not seem as quick as Half Life. That's not really a shooter. Dishonored might kind of go more into that sort of action realm. But I don't even know about that. And it's always interesting to switching hands here, go into series like this, kind of after the fact. Um, for me to play them, long after they're sort of have had their initial wave of popularity. And sort of I also tend to be kind of removed from fan bases. I'm witness to a lot of things online. I sort of pull a lot of information about certain franchises in, but I don't really follow specific opinions. I'm not really going to watch videos on things that I'm not into so much. Um, so it's really interesting to sort of form my own opinions on these games as I play them. And a series that I did this with, which, believe it or not, is a series that I think you can compare the Half Life series pretty well to, is actually Kingdom Hearts, which I know sounds really weird at first, but I think both series have a sort of sparse style of storytelling where the games are not really story intensive. As funny as that sounds for Kingdom Hearts, where the lore is so kind of deep in that series and so much thought is put into it, and you could say the same about Half Life. You don't get too much story too often when you're actually playing the games. Each Half-Life game only really advances the story a little bit, when you really kind of think about it. Even the originals, it's this Half-Life 2 already starts, with the Combine is taken over and you destroy the Citadel, but there's still obviously a long way to go after that game. But both series, and speaking of the stories, the endings to games in both series can be kind of disappointing, kind of almost teasing other games more than um, ending conclusively in themselves. That's something they have in common. Both series have very unique worlds with very well designed aesthetics, very fun gameplay that they continue to kind of iterate on and add new things to with each game, which is any good game series would do. The characters in both series, I would say, are pretty simple, but also inherently likable and very iconic in their designs. Um, and of course, the almost the biggest thing in common, at least the thing that most people would think of, is that the third installment for both series is very long awaited. Um, so I find those comparisons interesting, and I think that sort of informs, in describing all that, you can kind of see what I think a lot about Half Life in terms of how its story compares to its gameplay. But to discuss the actual games, I think the first game is probably my favorite. It's the one I sort of have the fondest collective sort of all-in-one memory of. I don't remember a lot of the specifics, but I remember the whole experience as being really, really fun. I think it has the most variety in kind of a lot of the stuff you do in the gameplay and in the locations. I mean, they really take that location, the idea of Black Mesa as this massive research facility, and get everything they can possibly get out of that location. There are so many things that you do, so many different places that you go, that by the time you get to Zen, which a lot of people said wasn't that great, it almost doesn't matter. Zen is pretty fun for what it is. You get two great boss fights, you get a cool factory area to go through, and the Nye Lamp is so cool and so scary. I really did not expect to see that thing when I played that game. And as much as I like Half-Life 1 now, I can only imagine what it was like to play when it came out, because it must have been a totally new thing to have that kind of freedom in a shooter, to have that kind of story experience in a shooter where you're seeing the story happen before your eyes. Um, Half-Life 2 is also very good. Not quite as good as 1. It definitely drags early in the airboat segment, which is not a good thing for it to kind of start dragging that early. But once you get past the Obert segment, it starts going along at a good clip, and it's pretty fun up until the end. The gravity gun is really, really cool. I, for some reason, kind of forgot how cool it was until I played episodes 1 and 2, but it's really cool how it's a weapon that you get early on, and it makes you feel really strong, but the weapon is not, it's not actually that strong. It's just an illusion because it feels so fun to use. Um, for instance, like you can break the supply crates easily with the gravity gun, but normal crates, it takes several shots with the gravity gun, picking it up, throwing it, zapping it over and over and over again to break them, but it only takes a couple hits with the crowbar. So that's an interesting you know shift there, where like the gravity gun feels strong, but it's not that strong, of course, until it is at the end of the game. The story of Half-Life 2 is okay. The intro is obviously very iconic. It is odd that there's not a little more explanation on the 7-hour war and how the Combine came to Earth, but I think that's obviously the Half-Life series doesn't really like splitting. It doesn't like going into flashbacks. It doesn't like showing other characters and things like that, because it's all through Gordon's eyes. So it makes a level of sense, but I would like to know more about that. Maybe it's been said in supplementary stuff. So that's about all I have to say about 2. Episode 1 is pretty cool, but it's maybe the worst game out of the main 4, which makes sense. I'm sure people kind of agree on that. It's short, but one thing that I finally got while playing the game is why people like Alyx. Because while playing Half-Life 2, I was like, why do people like this character? She's not really in this game that much. And it became clear to me that, episodes 1 and 2 are like the Alyx games. These are the games where you're with her all the time. These are the games where you kind of get to know her and she talks to you a lot. What I do like about episode 1 is that it's almost like a movie. It's like Escape from City 17, it starts right after the destruction of the Citadel, and you have to go back in, which is unexpected and very cool. And then when you're on the train going away from it, boom, blows up, it's over. City 17 is basically gone. Going off of that, I can start talking about, I think one of the strongest elements of the Half-Life series, along with the gameplay, is the settings. The settings are so well designed. They're so iconic, as I've said. And I think the way that they're set up, where you go from one to the other with almost no breaks. You're teleported near the end of Half-Life 2, but other than that, there's it's almost a straight shot. There's no scene break in the entire game, in both games. There's no like, Gordon went to sleep and then he woke up hours later in a daze. I at least I don't remember that there being anything like that. So that sense is really cool, that sense of connection, and just the locations themselves are really cool. You can tell they spend so much time on this stuff, where a shooter like Modern Warfare, which I played very recently, I played the remastered version of that story campaign. The levels, they're not super different. The coolest level in Modern Warfare is the Chernobyl level, where you're sneaking into Chernobyl, the area where Chernobyl is. But beyond that, the settings are kind of lame, and they're just sort of a vehicle to just have fun shooting things. And even the shooting gameplay is, pretty simple. It's just like every other shooter. Occasionally you can summon a helicopter to, firebomb a house or something. But, compare that to something like Half-Life. It's way different. The settings they go from scary to bright to, weird, Combine technology to, to sort of the Black Mesa East Research Lab, to City 17, which is like a mix of a few things. And in Half-Life 1 you have Zen, which there's never been a thing like that in the series since, which is really cool. That aliens are a big theme in the series, but you never really go to an alien planet. You only do it that one time. And you can just tell, I think during development they really think about, how do we use these locations? Which locations, like the Citadel, do we want to reuse? Do we want to show in a different light? You start out in City 17, and you come back later and the revolution is in full swing. Then you come back in episode 1 and it's all destroyed. There's antlions everywhere. There's dead bodies everywhere. I think they really think about that, is how do we get the most out of every single location we are using without milking them too hard, too much. And that's really one of my favorite things about the series. It's just oh, hold on a second. Let me reload my notes here because I think there's some stuff that I wrote since that has not been. Okay, here we go. Oh darn it! I just closed the page. Guys, I'm not remaking this video. I'm 10 minutes into this thing. Hold on just a second. Gotta go back to my Tumblr. Gotta go to my drafts. What the heck was I saying? Yeah, locations are great. They're so cool. And just they're iconic. You can tell they put so much into designing these areas. It's just like how a Naughty Dog game, when it's so you say it's The Last of Us is just a third-person shooter / stealth game. But even disregarding the story, which is, it's good in Last of Us, the care that is put into the locations, the design of the levels, is almost second to none. That's almost Naughty Dog's best aspect, in my opinion. And I think, like, I wouldn't be surprised if Uncharted 4, the same amount of work kind of went into that game as something like a GTA 5. I mean, the design is just so, the infinitesimal, details are there. And that's the same with Half-Life Alyx, but even back in Half-Life 2, they sort of did as much as they could with that. And, you can tell how much they planned this stuff out. So, I really like episode 2, all the nature that's in it. Is really cool. That's a really cool place to take the series to, because you have the coast in Half-Life 2, but it's not the same. The nature area feels much more different. It's more tranquil. It's more open. And it makes it's quieter. It makes it a little scarier when you're fighting the hunters or you're meeting the advisor for the first time. Because it almost feels like, a classical alien story, like, the aliens have invaded the farmland. You get the mine area, the factory area, which are also kind of like, they're like redos of areas that are in Half-Life 2, but they're remixed, and you have that great gameplay, where it's so cool how they find all these different things just to do. That's almost what makes a good shooter, is just sort of giving you a feeling of variety, even though shooters are probably some of the games that have the most hard gameplay to put variety into. The gameplay isn't super malleable. It's not like Breath of the Wild, where you can do so much with that huge third-person view. You have all these items you can throw anywhere and you can do whatever. Doing some of that stuff in a shooter is most shooters don't do that, but Half-Life does try to do it. So, in episode 2, you have that great final segment where you're going around sticking those bombs on the Striders, and that's awesome. You have the segment at the end of Half-Life 2 where you have the super gravity gun. You have the part where you're storming the gates of Nova Prospect with the antlions. You have, God, I'm sure there's plenty other just fun kind of gameplay things where suddenly, like, the game kind of just feels different. The final segment of episode 1 is just a Strider fight, which is kind of lame. But the final segment of episode 2 feels very different from that. It's like really, it's so cool because it's tower defense is what it really is, which I wasn't thinking. That wasn't what I was thinking when I was going out to do that. I thought, oh, well, I'm just going to go to these Striders and they might stay stationary and they're going to fight me. But no, they really go through that area, go closer and closer to the research lab, which, by the way, was really cool to fight Combine in, because that was almost like a callback to the original game. You go to Black Mesa East in Half-Life 2, you don't really get to fight anyone there. You just get the gravity gun and then you leave. You go to Ravenholm. So it was really cool to fight Combine in the research facility because it just felt like the original Half-Life. So I have a lot of respect for, what they do with the gameplay in Half-Life, just how many different weapons they come up with, how many different ideas they come up with, all in that source engine. Even, things like just, the part in episode 2 where Alyx is sniping the the zombies, and you have to remove pieces of the ceiling and stuff to give her better aim. The part where, of course, you're putting the turrets down and helping those two funny dudes fight the antlions. All that stuff is really cool. It's just these little wrinkles of gameplay. And Alyx is yet another game that does all this stuff. So, I watched Vinny from Vinesauce play this, and he's a great streamer. And the game looks so cool, I gotta say. I have only tried VR once, and I'm not sure if it's the right fit for me because one of my eyes moves slower than the other one, so I'm not entirely sure if I could even really process VR the right way. But the game just looks incredible, and it's probably way more incredible to actually have this stuff 3D right in front of your eyes, full size, witnessing all this, hearing the audio, in 3D space. Probably a totally different thing, but even just seeing it here, it looks so cool. It's so Half-Life. It's everything that makes a Half-Life game. I'm no expert on Half-Life. I've only, played the series since 2015, but I've heard everyone saying it, that it feels like a Half-Life game. It's crazy that they developed it for so long without anyone knowing. You have the iconic settings, you have the fun and endearing characters. The great Rhys Darby is in the game accompanying you the whole way. That's awesome. And you have these segments that sort of push this VR gameplay to its limit, allowing you to do different things. I think the segment that most people have probably been talking about is the Jeff segment, where the game just goes full-on survival horror. You have a huge amount of items that you can pick up individually. You have to throw them at specific places, something that would not be as easy to do in a non-VR game. The precision of movement, where you can take a gun and you can point it this way. In a first-person shooter, normal FPS, I almost knocked my glasses off there, you can only shoot it this way or this way or this way. But in the VR game, you can go anywhere. And I've seen people do that in their when they're playing Alyx. I've seen people, they know a head crab or a barnacle's up there, so they stick the gun out a window and just shoot up, and it works. That's so cool. And quote unquote jankiness, which is a word I don't even like, doesn't even matter to me in the face of all this cool gameplay stuff, in the face of such a refined game where you can just tell they're trying to take this series to the next level. And I think this was also such a good idea for this to be the game that was the return of Half-Life. I think when you take this long to put out another game in a series, your priorities sort of change. If they just did Half-Life 3 right off the bat, that would be great. But I think it made a lot of sense to give people a fan service game before continuing the series, to say, here's what you remember about Half-Life. Here's what's really great about Half-Life, but here's something completely new also. So we go back to City 17, which everyone probably really wanted to see in new graphics, which they wouldn't have been able to do in Half-Life 3 because it's destroyed. And, we get to spend more time with Alyx, which I think is something also people really wanted to do, which, once again, you'd be able to do in Half-Life 3, but this feels different. It's just a very good idea to do a prequel. And of course it was a good idea because then having it be a prequel, a spin-off, allows it to be this VR game, which they would not have wanted to do Half-Life 3 VR only immediately, because people would have been pissed off. But announcing this game as, hey, it's the return of Half-Life, yes, but it's a prequel, says, okay, I guess you can do it in VR. That's fine, because I can just watch a Let's Play of it like me, and then I can play Half-Life 3 when that comes out. So that was a good idea, because then they can make this killer app VR game that really shows the promise of VR without getting too many people pissed off that they can't buy it without getting a $1,000 Valve Index headset. So I think that's a great idea for making the game that way, and I also like where they were taking the story, and this is sort of where we'll get to the final segment of this very informal video, as all my videos are. We'll talk about the future of Half-Life. So I read Mark Laidlaw, the writer of the series. I read his plans for episode 3 that he published in late 2017, and I liked a lot of his ideas, but some of it definitely rubbed me the wrong way. Specifically his idea, which is very evident in all the games that have come out, that the endings of every Half-Life game should be sort of open, which is not a good idea. It's not a good thing. That's something I don't like about any of the games, really. Half-Life Alyx does it the most correct because the game does have a fairly conclusive ending in a way. Um, but the other games often leave much to be desired, and now it's clear that this was specifically his idea, but it's not good because Half-Life does so much with its settings and with its gameplay that's great, but its story does not quite have enough meat to it to make those endings okay, make them feel kind of earned, where you can go and say, well, the ending was left open, but we had so much of everything else there that it's okay. The games don't really do that, I mean, both episode 1 and episode 2 end on a cliffhanger, obviously, because they weren't a complete story. But episode 3, Laidlaw is saying that it's supposed to be the end of the Half-Life 2 arc, yet it kind of feels like another cliffhanger. It's just like, oh, whoops, Gordon, you went on this whole adventure in this crazy ship, but now I guess the Combine is just super powerful, and I don't know if you have any hope of defeating them, buddy. I guess you better lick your wounds and come back next time. That's really what the ending of episode 3 was planned to be, at least Laidlaw's version. And that type of never-ending story just doesn't work. The Half-Life 2 saga, which I guess will now not be the Half-Life 2 saga anymore because the next game will probably be called Half-Life 3, should probably end with them defeating the Combine somehow. Or just something more than, well, you tried, which is how episode 3 was going to end. Something from Laidlaw's plans for episode 3 that Alyx keeps that I do really like is the G-Man taking Alyx and hiring Alyx and saying, you know what, you're the person that I think I like a little more than this Gordon guy. He doesn't seem like I can keep a good leash on him very well, so I'm taking Alyx now. Half-Life episode 3 had a scene in it where Alyx kills a person that Gordon does not want to kill, and I think that sort of shows the G-Man that she is I don't know exactly what it shows him about her, but I just like that idea of it's sort of, you could kind of say it turns Alyx into a damsel in distress, and I'm sure they're going to make sure that it does not feel that way in episode 3 or Half-Life 3, but at the same time the G-Man chooses Alyx, hires her because of how how quote unquote strong she is, and the tenacity she has that maybe he thinks Gordon doesn't have. He thinks maybe Gordon is too soft, or Gordon is too out for justice instead of just accomplishing whatever goals he wants. So that's the end of Half-Life Alyx. Alyx is hired. She's taken away from the current timeline. Gordon now has to go out and find her and maybe fight her. She's in service of the G-Man. We'll see. But I think what they did with the G-Man at the end of Alyx is really cool. Once again, it's a fan service game, so having it sort of all lead up to the G-Man, and you sort of get a little better grasp on what he is and his abilities. His cage is designed; it looks just like a virus. What a virus actually looks like. So they're sort of implying that that's sort of maybe what he is a little bit. Is if he's a virus, he splits himself in different parts and things like that. So it really seems like Half-Life Alyx takes the good elements from Laidlaw's stuff, and I hope they continue to do that because, for instance, setting part of the next game in the Arctic, really cool idea. Obviously going to the Borealis, which is planned, so I'm sure they'll do that. It's nice that they sort of reconfirm, yes, we are continuing straight from episode 2 at the end of Alyx, because no one wants them to just do a reboot or something. Everyone just wants them to continue with Gordon. So it's good that they confirm that they're doing that. I do think something I'm interested in is that I think there was a pretty clear romantic link between Alyx and Gordon that is set up, maybe not so much in Half-Life 2, but in episodes 1 and 2 for sure. Eli even kind of jokes about it at one point. I think there's going to be a big temptation for the devs to not go in this direction. And I'm not casting any judgment on that. I'm just saying, obviously, in 2020, people aren't really going to be too into a cut and dry romantic arc like that ends with Alyx oddly leaning to you in first person and kissing you at the end of Half-Life 3. I don't think people are going to be into that, so I'm interested to know what they will do with that. I hope they just stay the course and do it, which is so funny how that almost seems brave at this point. Once again, no judgment. I'm just stating kind of the facts of how I see things, where I definitely think there's going to be a temptation to go for this kind of buddy friendship aspect more than a romantic thing, even though to me it seemed like that was what was planned in episode 1 and 2. All speculation, doesn't matter. Half-Life 3 as a game, we're obviously going to get it. I don't know if they're developing it yet. And it doesn't need to be in VR. When I was first watching Alyx, I was thinking, God, how do they go back from this? How do they do another Half-Life game and make it better than this? It's almost not possible with how great this game is. But as you watch the game, it becomes clear that you don't have that freedom of movement. You don't have that speed of gameplay. You can't have crazy weapons like the gravity gun, or big weapons like the rocket launcher, because you can only hold weapons in one hand because of how VR is set up. And there's all kinds of stuff like that. And you can't have wide open areas. You can't get in a car and drive around because the controls of that are already kind of weird in the games we have. They'd be even weirder in VR. You can have much bigger set pieces in a non-VR game. So I don't think it's something to worry about. I really can't wait to see what they do with Half-Life 3. I think it's going to be a huge game. I think it may have more open elements to it. And I just really would love to see where they take this story. I think if they take the right stuff from Laidlaw's plans, which it seems like they are, and they add in a lot of new stuff themselves, I think it's just going to be awesome. So those are my thoughts on Half-Life. It's a long video, had some weird errors in it. I feel like I should have just ignored the fact that I almost knocked my glasses off instead of doing some weird haha, look what almost happened bit, because it was not really worth even mentioning. But hey, I do these videos in one shot, so what are you gonna do? Thanks for watching. Comment on what you think about all this crap that I just talked about. Let me know what you think about the future of Half-Life, any of the other stuff I said. Thanks for watching.